So thank you. Thank you for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to share my ideas about Kashmir Shaiva Darshan with the audience. It's a privilege for me, an honor for me that you have given me this opportunity. Now, the topic that you have given is extremely vast, Kashmir Shaiva Darshan. So I don't know how much I am going to cover. I mean, even to give an outline of the important aspects of Kashmir Shaivism is a gigantic task. But I will try my best to give an outline of the rich philosophical uh, tradition that Kashmir Shaivism is. Uh, Actually, Kashmir Shaivism, we all know it is an Indian philosophy. There's no doubt about that. But there has been a tragedy with Kashmir Shaivism. It has not got its due place in the Indian academic scenario. Mostly we study about the orthodox system, which refers to the Vedic system, and then we study the heterodox systems, in which we generally study Jainism, Buddhism, Shaiva, etc. And during the BA and the MA courses, nowhere we find that Kashmir Shaivism has been given a place as a matter of compulsory study. In some places, very few places, it is available as an optional. So it is not finding its due place either in the curricula or in the competitions, etc. So people do not pay attention to it. So I'm really deeply pained by this scenario because, in my understanding, Kashmir Saivism is perhaps the best or one of the best philosophical schools, both in terms of religion, mystical tradition, as well as in philosophy. So it is very imperative that we understand the significance of this philosophy and also what are the important characteristics of this philosophy which make it stand apart from the other philosophies that we usually study. What are the excellences in this philosophy which make it stand apart and which, in a way, reflect the superiority, philosophical superiority of this school. I will start with the basics, as my teacher and supervisor, Professor H.S. Prasad, says that we should also always start with the basics. So, when we talk of Kashmir Shaivism, we know that it is an Agam tradition, it is a Tantric tradition. And usually, in the understanding of philosophy, we make a very sharp distinction between Agam and Nigam tradition. Nigam stands for the Vedic traditions, Agam stands for the Tantric tradition. Then there is the use of the word Tantra. My feeling is that there has been a misunderstanding regarding the meaning and connotations of these terms, whether it is Tantra or it is Agam or it is Nigam, and we are using these terms just in a traditional manner, in the sense that our earlier scholars have been using it for referring to certain schools and ideas, and we are just carrying it over without understanding the significance of these terms and the connotations of these terms. So first of all, I would like to say something about these terms themselves, so that the basics become clear. Let me first of all talk about the word tantra. Uh, Normally speaking, in society there is a very negative perception about the word tantra, and it is taken as some mystical, magical practices, generally of a negative kind, which is used to harm people or at best to obtain worldly objectives. So this is the general perception, but of course it is not true. If we look at the etymology of the word tantra, then it is coming from the Sanskrit root verb tan, T-A-N, in which we would. So, tana dhatu, it has the connotation of stretching, expanding, to expand, to stretch. That is the meaning of the tan dhatu, from which you develop the word tantra. Now, what are the logical implications of the use of this dhatu? Whenever we say that something is being stretched, something is being, extended, then it it is a logical implication that that thing in its initial stage was in a somewhat compact form, and it is being stretched, extended. Nonetheless, it is the same thing. If you stretch a rubber band, it does not become a different rubber band. It is only stretched. So similarly, if you have anything and you stretch it, then it is extending itself. It's not that a new thing has come into existence. It has just extended itself. And Tantra refers to the result of this extending process. What comes up as a result of this extension in that nuclear thing, in that compact thing, that whole extended structure may be referred to as Tantra. Now, if you refer this particular idea to the metaphysical framework, then we can say that there may be some metaphysical reality which is compact, and it stretches itself, it extends it. Now, this extension results in a different structure, in a different form of that very reality. That reality does not change. The metaphysical reality does not change in its substantial nature, but it comes up in a new form, and that whole new form, together with its substantial nature as well as its extended aspect, that is what is referred to as tantra. So you understand now that tantra is taken as a metaphysical concept in which it is presupposed that there has been an extension of some compact nuclear reality into an into a vast extended form, and it has manifested itself in a vast extended form. But all that is nonetheless the same reality. So the reality has not changed. What are the implications of this connotation? The metaphysical implication is that whatever that metaphysical reality is, that itself is manifesting throughout all the aspects of the Tantra. So, Tantra is the manifestation of that central metaphysical reality. So, you can obviously see that this is very different from what the general perception of Tantra is. It is basically a metaphysical concept. And of course, based on this metaphysical concept, you develop various other philosophical, religious, and mystical ideas. But at the root of it, you have this basic connotation of Tantra, and we should never forget it. That's number one. Now, as far as Agam and Nigam is concerned, you know, Agam in Sanskrit, it is Agachati, that which comes, and Nigam is that which goes out, that which flows out. That is Nigam. So, what is the difference between the Vedic tradition, which is generally referred to as the Nigam tradition, and the Tantric tradition, which is generally referred to as the Agam tradition? Let me first, point out the difference. Then I will also point out how this difference is somewhat superficial And basically, there is no contradiction between the Nigam and Agam tradition. As Tulsidas says, Nana Puran Nigam Agam Sammatang. So the learned, the spiritual people, the saints of our tradition, they actually do not see a conflict between the Nigam and the Agam tradition. Unfortunately, as you can see, all of us, you must be knowing that in our curriculum at the UG and the PG level, we are trying to draw a rigid line between Nigam and Agam tradition. And we generally tend to take up the Vedic tradition and the heterodox traditions and totally ignore the Agam tradition. This is not correct. In fact, if you carefully look at the religious practices which are prevalent in society, then you would find that more than the Vedic traditions, the Nigam traditions, the various aspects and rituals of the Agam tradition, the Tantric tradition, they are being practiced in a more frequent manner, in a general manner. So we are actually moving away from the nature of reality that is existing, nature of philosophical and religious reality that is existing in our society. Now, let me first point out the difference between Nigam and Agam in terms of their etymology. You see, when you say Nigam, Nirgachati, that which goes out, that which flows out. Obviously, the stress, the emphasis here is on the starting point, the source. What, what is the nature of the source from which something is originating? And that process of origination, that process of flowing out, that is referred to by Nigam. If you look at Agam, Agam is emphasizing upon the receiving end, that which is receiving something, that to which something is coming. Agachati iti agama. So that which is coming is agam. So, but you can see very much that logically, when something goes out, it will obviously go to some point. It will obviously go to somewhere. And if something is coming up, if something is being received, then obviously it has to be coming from somewhere. So you can't say that something is only going out, flowing out, and also you can't say that something is only being received. You have to take care of both the ends. You have to take in cognizance both the source as well as the receiving point. What has happened historically is that the Nigam tradition, it has emphasized on the originating point, and the Agam tradition has emphasized on the receiving point. So when we say that the Nigam tradition is, emphasizing on the originating point, then on the basis of that, what is understood is that how is this Vedic knowledge? How are the mantras, the riches of the Vedas? They are originating, and there you have the definition of rishi as rishio mantra drashtaraha. So rishio mantra drashtaraha, it shows that things are being or vibrations are being witnessed. They're not being created, they're not being authored, they are being witnessed in a higher state of spiritual consciousness. And that is defines the nature of its source. So the nature of this source is the defining characteristic of the Nigam tradition. Now, because of the superiority and excellence of the source and the divinity of the source, the Nigam tradition believes that whatever is being received through this process can never be wrong. Okay, we all know that anyone believing in the Vedic authority believes that the Vedic mantras, they are all true, they cannot be challenged, they cannot be proved wrong by any means, by any pramana. This happens because of the belief in the transcendent divine nature of its source. And this is being emphasized. This is the Nigam tradition. So you have something coming up, flowing out from a higher level, and then you try to understand what it is. You try to put it into practice. You make an effort to realize what it is trying to say. So when the Upanishads say Aham Brahmasmi, first of all, you don't doubt that this statement is wrong or it can be challenged. You accept it to be true. Now, of course, this is a hypothetical belief, but it has to be, understood. It has to be realized through sadhana and all that thing. So this is the process of the Nigam tradition. In contrast, what is happening in the Agam tradition? Now let me point it out. In Agam tradition, the emphasis is on the receiving end. This emphasis means that what a person, what a sadhak, a spiritual aspirant and practitioner has realized in his own higher spiritual states, something which has been directly experienced, realized, which cannot be challenged through any other empirical experience or logical argumentation. That forms the core of the Agam tradition. So, this emphasis on the reception of higher spiritual ideas, realizations, this is what is emphasized in the Agam tradition. Not only this, it is not, you know, exclusively accepting the spiritual realizations of one particular person or two particular persons. It is collectively taking into account the spiritual realizations of the practitioners of Tantra and the Agam tradition. And it comes to a conclusion that there are common characteristics in their divine experiences. Now, these divine experiences have been compiled in the form of the Agamic texts. Now, most of these traditional Agamic texts, they are not in the name of any particular individual author. This is also something very remarkable I would like to share. Most of these traditional Agam texts, they are in the form of dialogue between Shiv and Parvati. Sometimes Shiv is questioning, Parvati is answering, sometimes Parvati is questioning and Shiv is answering. So this way, you have these texts, and no person is presented as the author of these books. I mean, in the Nigam tradition, you have rishis names associated with the richas, as they are the rishis of this particular Vedic hymn or richa. That's very common. But in the Agamic tradition, you will not find that particular person's names are associated with the Agamic works. Now, what is the significance of this? This is something very interesting. As you know, in the Tantric tradition, everything has been seen as an extension of that central nuclear metaphysical reality. That metaphysical reality is manifesting itself in the form of everything. In the Agamic tradition, Shiv and Shakti, they are presented as that central core metaphysical reality. Later on, in the process of creation, it is explained that the Shiv aspect is emphasized in the male aspect, male person, and the Shakti aspect is emphasized in the female individual. So when there is a dialogue between two persons, It is presented as a dialogue between Shiv and Shakti. This shows that the person is not identifying himself or herself as a mortal individual, not at all interested in identifying in its, you know, worldly identity. They are more interested and more committed to their divine identities as Shiv and Shakti and as the combination of. So, in because of this outlook, which is very common and which is essential to the agamic tradition, these authors, not authors, I would say, these spiritual masters of the tantric tradition, they have compiled their conversations, they have compiled their ideas in the form of questions and answers in the name of Shiv and Shakti. So this is something very remarkable. In the Nigam tradition, you say that Aham Brahmasmi, but you talk of individual identities and individual names, and you associate those names with the ritas as the rishis to whom they have been revealed. But in the Agamic tradition, I think the commitment, the metaphysical commitment to the nature of oneself is more thorough. Here you find that the person is totally identifying with Shiv and Shakti and has given up his individual mortal identity. So this is one. Now, so far I have been talking about the difference between the Nigam and the Agam tradition. Now let me tell you something about the convergence of Nigam and the Agam tradition. What is common between the two? The common point between the Nigam and the Agam tradition is that both these traditions talk of spiritual experiences which have gained at a higher level of consciousness. So, at the transcendent level of consciousness, when there has been enough spiritual evolution, then in that state of spiritual evolution, certain ideas, certain vibrations, they have, spontaneously arisen in their consciousness, manifested in their consciousness. And even when they come down from that higher spiritual state, the memories of those experiences, even though it may not be complete, even if it is partial, they remain with that person. And those experiences are then shared with the other deserving spiritual aspirants. And that is how, the Vedas have, Vedic mantras have come into existence, and that is how the Agamic texts have come into existence. So it's not that actually they are two kinds of knowledge or that they are two kinds of experiences. They are actually two ways of looking at the same phenomenon. Not phenomenon in the sense of worldly thing, but something which is divine and transcendental, because we are talking of the higher state of consciousness attained through spiritual practices. So they are both originating at the same point. It is only that the Nigam tradition is focusing on the source and the Agam tradition is focusing on the experience aspect of that for the spiritual person. So there is no conflict. In terms of the basic connotations of Nigam and Agam, there is no conflict. They are just two faces of the same coin. Their points of emphasis differ, but actually they are referring to the same spiritual phenomenon. So this is one thing. Now, this Nigam and Agam tradition, the differences that we create between them, this is totally artificial and arising out of misunderstanding. The metaphysical facts which have been given in the Nigam tradition and the metaphysical facts which have been given in the Agamic tradition, they are not in any kind of conflict. Rather, they complement. Together, they give you a more holistic picture of the metaphysical reality and the world which is associated. So, if we study and emphasize only the Nigam traditions and some of the heterodox traditions and ignore the Agamic traditions, the Tantric traditions, basically we are having a lopsided, understanding of the Indian spiritual tradition, which is unacceptable to me. Because if you do this, you are ignoring a very major section of our spiritual heritage without any proper justification. Just because it has been coming down to us in this manner for the past 2 centuries, you continue with it, that is no excuse for its justification. So we need to correct this. It is very important. So now I have talked to you about the Nigam tradition, the Agam tradition, apparent differences between the Nigam and Agam traditions, the actual convergence of the Nigam and Agam traditions. I've talked to you about Tantra. So, this is the first thing that I wanted to make clear because when we are going to talk about the Tantric tradition, we must first understand what is Tantra, what is Nigam, and what is Agam. Now, let me come to particularly Kashmir Shaivism, which is also known as Trik Darshan and Pratibhigya Darshan. All these terms are full of rich spiritual connotation. So I will have to explain these terms one by one and make it clear how these terms they are not actually divergent, they are actually convergent, and they refer to one and the same thing um, from different points of view. At best, you can say that. So, first of all, the most simplest one, Kashmir Shiv. When you talk of Kashmir Shaivism, why is it called Kashmir Shiv? The word Kashmir is used because it has developed, it has flourished mainly in Kashmir. Most of the writers, commentators of this tradition, they have been in the geographical region of Kashmir. You have very few later writers and commentators coming from other areas outside Kashmir. So that is one geographical reason for the use of the word Kashmir. Now, Shaivism, as you know, it is coming from the word Shiv, and Shiv word has been used as the central reality in this philosophy, in this tradition. What is the meaning of Shiv? The meaning of Shiv is multifaceted. There are various kinds of meaning which are associated with it in Sanskrit, but some of the important ones I would like to share. For example, it is beneficence, kalyan. Shiv connotes kalyan, universal beneficence. Then Shiv connotes anand, bliss. Shiv connotes eternality, nityata, that which is forever. So, if you put together these connotations of Shiv, then Shiv is referring to something. It is referring to a metaphysical reality which is universal, infinite, which is of the nature of bliss, and which is absolutely beneficial. Shiv is not primarily referring to the anthropomorphic form of a deity. Commonly in society, we think, Shiv is a particular deity among many of the deities, many devas. You have one deva or Mahadeva, and he has a particular form. He has five faces, this, that. So there are various, ideas about the form of Shiva. I'm not saying that these ideas do not have any relevance or significance. They are all symbolic. They all represent many things. For example, just to give you an idea of it, when you talk of the Shivling, which is the most common representation of Shiva, then it is not anthropomorphic. It is in the form which has no particular beginning point and no particular ending point. You can start anywhere and you can come around to the same place. So the Shivling represents something which is infinite, which has no beginning and which has no end. This is a symbolic representation, the metaphysical nature. Now, this Shiva is the central theme of Kashmir Shaivism. Therefore, this tradition has been referred to as Kashmir Shaivism because you can relate this with the concept of Tantra. Tantra is the extension of the given reality. And what is that central reality, metaphysical reality? That reality is Shiv. That is referred to as Shiv in this tradition. And whatever is there in this universe or even beyond it, it is all Shiv. So Shiv is all that and even beyond that. So when we talk of the world and the metaphysical reality in terms of Shiv, of course, we would refer to as Shaivism. So we use the term Kashmir Shaivism for this. The other very common term which is used for this tradition is Trikadarshan. Trik in English we translate it as triadic, referring to three, triadic philosophy or Trikadarshan. What is this significance of three? Significance of three can be understood in two ways. One of that is Shiv, Shakti, and Pashu. Shiv, I have already explained to you what it refers to. How is Shakti understood in Kashmir or in the Greek Darshan? They mean one and same. Now, I'll explain this with the help of an example. You think of fire. Fire at the worldly level or at the level of worldly understanding is taken as a phenomenon. It is a particular thing happening. In a sense, it exists and it has certain characteristics. It emits heat, it emits light. Now, these characteristics of emitting heat and light are inseparable from the so called fire. So, you may talk of fire when you use your ordinary worldly language. You may talk of fire and you may talk of its heat and you may talk of its light by using different terms and even discursively thinking about these things in a disparate manner. Or that is, you may think that fire is a thing, it exists, it has a substantial nature, and emission of heat and emission of light is a phenomenon which is happening. It's an activity which is happening. It's not a substance. I mean, you can differentiate using your discursive intellect. That is possible at the worldly level, and it does happen. But what is the real fact? The real fact is that what we call fire is always having emission of heat and emission of light. It cannot be that you will have emission of heat and emission of light and there will be no fire behind. In one form or other, fire will be there. Otherwise, this will not. On the other hand, similarly, it cannot be that you have fire and there is no emission of heat and no emission of light. So we may think at the worldly level of fire, heat, and light as different concepts, different words in different terms of different categories, but actually they are one and same. Factually speaking, they represent one and the same. Similarly, when we talk of Shiva, then Shiv is primarily we are saying that it is a central metaphysical reality. Okay. But by saying this, we should not conclude that there are no inseparable characteristics associated with Shiva. There are certain inseparable characteristics associated with that so called metaphysical core reality. And those characteristics, those activities associated with Shiva, this is that they are what we refer to as Shakti. So Shakti, the word itself, means power. Power obviously has to belong to something. Power does not hang in vacuum. Power is associated with something, belongs to something, and it has the capacity to do so. These are just logical implications. If you just carefully look at these terms, you can understand these implications. So Shiva and Shakti, they are two aspects of the same central metaphysical reality, the tantra of which is this universe and beyond. Then the third term comes, which is Pashu. In Hindi, by Pashu we mean animal. But in Sanskrit, if you look at the meaning of this term, then it is associated with the term Pash. Pash means a leash, Leash, a leash, something through which you restrain somebody or some animal, you bind, that is a leash, that is a Pash. So it is, restraining, restricting the free movement, the free activities of some being. That is Pash. And one who is, the object of that Pash, one who is being restricted by that Pash in terms of activities, thoughts, etc., that is called a Pashu. So Pashu here is representing any being. By being, I mean, obviously something which has cognitive capacity, which has consciousness. So Pashu represents any being, the activities and thoughts of which are being restricted. That is a Pashu. So as human beings, we are Pashu. The so-called animals they are also Pashu. Everything that is manifested in this world is a Pashu. Why? Because whatever is being manifested in this world is substantially speaking identical with Shiva. Remember, Tantra, it is an extension. So there is only one metaphysical reality. Kashmir Shaivism is an absolutist system, Vadi Darshan. So it's an absolutistic system. And in this absolutist system, whatever may be the form of its manifestation as Tantra, that is substantially identical with that reality. If it is identical with that reality, then its original nature must be identical with the nature of that original reality. But the original nature, the essential nature of Shiv is in terms of infinite bliss, transcendent existential nature beyond space time causality, in terms of absolute freedom. So these are essential characteristics of Shiva. And if everything is substantially one with Shiva and it is not capable of manifesting these characteristics of Shiva, then obviously and logically it is a Pashu. So any being having consciousness who is not able to manifest, exercise infinite bliss, infinite knowledge, infinite transcendent existence, they are all logically Pashu. So, three important aspects through which this system tries to explain everything, they are Shiv, Shakti, and Pashu. And that is why this darshan has also been called the Trik darshan. So now you understand the importance of these three. Without Shakti, without the essential powers associated with Shiv, nothing can happen. As Shankaracharya, himself says in the very first verse of Sundarya Lahari, Shiva Shaktya Yukto Yadi Bhavati Shakta Prabhuvitu, Nache Devam Devo Nakhalu Kushla Spanditu. When Shiv is conjoined with Shakti, then only it is capable of doing anything. If not conjoined with Shakti, it is not capable of even a span, a vibration. That is why you must be noting that in our society, in very common parlance, we say that Shiv without Shakti is Shav, is like a corpse. So it is there, but it can't do anything. It does not have the capacity to do anything. Okay, so Shiv, Shakti, and Pashtu. These three are very important for explaining and developing the framework of Kashmir Shiva. Now there is another way of understanding this particular tradition, which is an alternative explanation of the Trikdar. Three important concepts are again taken up. One is par, then parapar, and then you have apar. Par in English would mean transcend, that which is beyond space, time, causality, language, logic. That is par. Parapar is basically par and apar. So it's a combination of the transcendent and that which is not the transcendent, or that which is not the transcendent, what would that mean? The immanent. So the transcendent and the immanent. Immanent, by that I mean what is manifest at the level of the phenomenal universe, or at the level of phenomenal universe in a general. So you have parapar, and apar. Upper refers to the immanent exclusive. It does not have access to the region beyond space, time, causality, etc. So these three aspects go hand in hand. They are related with each other. Obviously, they have to be related with each other because in a tantric system, the central reality extends itself in the form of the. So, whatever is the form of the manifestation, basically, substantially, it is one and the same. Nonetheless, what is the significance of these three par, parapar, and apar? Par or the transcendent This refers to Shiv because in its pure aspect, Shiv is beyond space, time, causality, language, logic. You cannot understand, it's not possible to understand the nature of Shiva by using discursive knowledge, by using your intellect, or by the use of language and arguments. It is not possible to understand. That is why it is Par. So Par refers to Shiv in its transcendent aspect. Then you have Parapar, Par and Apar. Now this is very important. Par and Apar both simultaneous, which means it is both transcendent as well as immanent. How is this possible and what is it referring to? It is referring to Shakti because even in its transcendent aspect, Shiv can never be dissociated from Shakti. Just like I told you in the example that fire can never be dissociated from uh, its power to emit light or emit heat. So similarly, even its transcendent aspect, Shiv is always associated with its Shakti. So in this aspect, Shakti is one. But in the other aspect, Shakti of Shiva is responsible for the epistemic projection of the world, the epistemic manifestation of the phenomenal universe. And through this epistemic manifestation, the substantial Shiva is immanent. It is omnipresent. It is everywhere. And this is referring to the upper aspect of Shiva. And Shakti is also manifesting through all this and is responsible. So Shakti is both par and apar. The world would not be possible without the Shakti. So this immanent or upper aspect is there because of Shakti only. And at the same time, Shakti is also transcend, associated with Shiva. So therefore it is parapar. Then you have apar. Apar is immanent aspect. So this immanent aspect means that you are restricted to the realm of space, time, language, logic, etc. You are not capable of going beyond that. You can handle things, ideas only within it. Now, this is the situation of the phenomenal universe, and we are also included in this. So, no matter how evolved is your intellectual development, you are still within the upper world, upper in the sense immanent world, that which is restricted by space time, etc. Okay, so this is referring to the realm of Pashu in a way, I would say. So, what in the earlier interpretation we had referred to as Pashu, so that here is being indicated by the term upper. So, upper is all this. So, again, you find that there are three important concepts through which the Kashmir Shaivism tradition may be understood. They are par, parapar, and upper. That is why it is also known as Trikdarshan. Okay. So, Trikdarshan, I explained to you Kashmir Shaivism, why it is called Kashmir Shaivism. I explained to you Trikdarshan in terms of two interpretations. The first interpretation was Shiv, Shakti, and Pashu, and the second interpretation was Par, Parapar, and Apar. There is another term which is used for the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, and it is very commonly used. It is Pratibhigya. Now, what is this Pratibhigya? Pratibhigya, if we had to translate it into English, it would be like self-recognition or recognition of something in its true nature. More than self-recognition, I think the appropriate translation would be recognition of any given thing, including the self, in its true nature. Now, what is the philosophical implication and significance of this term, Pratibhikya? There are certain logical implications. You can have recognition only when there has been an earlier experience of that thing in its true nature. I can recognize something if I have experienced it earlier in its true nature, then I have forgotten it for some time, and then I again come to regain that memory of its true nature. Then only the concept of recognition becomes complete. So, recognition requires that you have an earlier experience in its true nature. Secondly, recognition requires that you forget it. Thirdly, recognition requires that you regain your earlier knowledge of that. What is happening here in Kashmir Shaivism is exactly understandable and relatable in terms of this concept of pratikya. Because here, initially, there was only Shiv. Creation is not considered eternal in Kashmir Shaivism. Like in Mimamsa school, they consider the world as eternal. But in Kashmir Shaivism and all the tantric traditions, they consider that the world, the universe is not eternal. It is created. So that which is there before the creation and the manifestation of the world is Shiv. So this is the initial state. Shiv has the nature of consciousness. Now this consciousness is again a kind of a spiritual category. It is not to be understood and comparable with the conscious beings that we see in this world, because in this world we find that there are conscious beings who have a physical aspect, who are situated in space-time causality, and then they are manifesting some cognitive quality. This is not the idea of consciousness of Shiva. The consciousness of Shiva is beyond a space-time causality, all these things. So it is a different kind of reality, a different kind of existential category, not at all comparable with the things of this world. And this particular Shiva, yeah, what I was explaining, I was just, see, sometimes I lose track of the thing. And this particular Shiva, it is, I think, manifested in this world in each and everything. Nonetheless, the things in this world, the beings in this world, they are not aware of its true nature as Shiva. So you see, initially there has been Shiva, who is self-aware of its essential characteristics and powers. Then, in the process of creation through Shakti, there is forgetting, there is obliteration of that knowledge, that self-knowledge, and that is why it becomes Pashu. And then, in the third step, you have the process of spiritual practices and sadhana, and that consciousness is capable of regaining its earlier self awareness. So, when it regains it, that is what is called pratibhya. So, the process of creation, ignorance, bondage, then self realization, and then knowledge. This whole process is logically implied in the concept of pratibhigya. So just one word, pratibhigya, is so much loaded philosophically and logically that it conveys the crux of the Kashmir Shaivism. So this is something very interesting, and that is why I have used these different terms and tried to explain these things to you. Kashmir Shaivism, then Trik Darshan in terms of two alternative interpretations, and the Pratibhigya. So this was, a kind of introduction that I was giving to you, and now let me come to another important aspect, referring to the Nigam and the Agam tradition. Now, this is with reference to Pravritti and Nivritti Marg. We know that in the Nigam tradition, there has been talk of Shrey and Prey, especially in the Kathopanishad. There is an elaborate discussion about that, Shrey and Prey. And by Prey, they try to say that whatever is pleasant, whatever is giving you worldly happiness, going for that, striving for that, that is the path of Prey. And this is the path that, normally people in this world follow. They normally give the highest priority to material ends and sensory pleasures, and they follow this. So this is the path of Prey. In contrast, Kathopanishad talks of the path of Shrey. Shrey is the path of spiritual realization and growth. Now, this spiritual realization and growth has been presented in the Kathopanishad as incompatible with the path of Prey. So, there are two ways of living a life. Either you can live for the sake of material ends, or you can live the life for the sake of spiritual ends and ultimately self realization and liberation. So, you have to choose between the two. This is the message of the Upanishad. So, and in relationship with this Shrey and Premal, the two terms which are used in the philosophical circle, that is pravritti and nivritti. Pravritti means, going for things in the material sphere, trying to achieve goals and pleasures in the material sphere, even performing religious acts, religious rituals for the sake of material ends. And this is not a very insignificant thing, because if you look at the Vedic literature, you will find that almost 95% of the Vedas, they constitute the Karma Kand. And this Karma Kand section of the Vedas, this is all related with how to gain, material goals in this world, and how to gain longer, prolonged stays in the heaven, where you have more purified and intense forms of material pleasures. So 95% of the Vedas, they deal with Karma Kand, and they are oriented towards the attainment of material ends and pleasures. It is only in the 5% of the Vedanta literature that you find that spiritual goals and ends, objectives, they have been highlighted, and their superiority with reference to the material ends that has been emphasized. And not only that, the distinction of the Shrey and Prey has been made, and it is being presented that one should go for Shrey, one should go for spiritual objectives and realization, because that is not corruptible, that does not come to an end. Whereas the material pleasures, whether they belong to this world or to the heavens, they are not eternal, they have an end. So, this is the argument and this is the presentation of Shrey and Prey coming up in the Upanishads, especially the Kathopishads. So, they are making a distinction between pravritti and nivritti. Even in the Vedic tradition, the idea is that after completing your sanskaras, various sanskaras related with the phenomenal life, which includes marriage also as a very important sanskar, then only you are eligible for inquiry into the nature of Brahman or the highest metaphysical reality. So that is why in the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra, you have Athato Brahma Jigyasa. Now begins the inquiry into the nature of Brahman. So this Atha or now, this has been interpreted as pointing out that before you enter into the inquiry of the nature of Brahman, you should have completed all those things which are there in the Karmkand section of the Vedas pertaining to objectives in this world. So you find that in the Vedic tradition, in the Nigam tradition, there has been a distinction, there has been a separation of pravritti and nivritti, Shrey and Prey, and Shrey has been presented as the superior path leading to spiritual growth.